Greg, Christians believe that God exists, and that's taken for granted by most of us that are Christians. We've thought it for most part of our lives or for whatever. But if you think about it, that really is a bit of an odd belief, because we don't just believe in this being, but in many of our cases we've given our whole lives to this being, and we've never seen him, we've never touched him, we've never smelled him, never heard from him or anything like that. So why is it that so many people have found the existence of God to be such a persuasive idea and believe that he really is there? What kind of arguments are there that Christians have used?
Well, it's to be expected that we can give quite a few arguments for God, because scriptures say on quite a few occasions that the creation all around us, and perhaps even the creation within us, bear witness to God's existence. So when I think of the issue, and it is hard to give decisive proofs for God within 5 minutes or something, but I do think about the evidence for God from the world. So a Kalam cosmological argument for God's existence, which has been very popular and has medieval Muslim roots, but actually has more ancient Christian roots all the way to the 4th century. Then we have an argument for God, what I say, from the heart, which has actually proven to be quite persuasive to me just in becoming a believer, which would be an argument for God's existence from the phenomenon of moral intuition, really from the existence of an objective moral law. And this was quite influential for me. And then maybe an argument for God from the mind, in particular our rational intuitions, our sense that there are laws of logic. There are quite a few necessary truths that puny, finite human beings that we may be, it does seem as if we do have access to these truths. So what explains these extraordinary truths that we have access to? And so I think we can give an argument for God from the objectivity, immutability of the laws of logic as really divine ideas. So from the world, from the heart, from the mind, I mean, these are all ways that I think God himself has designed to be pointers to himself.
Now, you mentioned the one that's been most powerful on you, the one from the heart. Tell me a little bit more about that argument and how it had an impact on you.
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in a non-Christian home in Los Angeles, never read a Bible till I was halfway through high school, and somebody planted in my hands a copy of C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And book 1 of that text is called Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. And I didn't know at that time I was actually reading a kind of revival, restatement of a moral argument for God's existence that many philosophers in the past actually have given. But Lewis gives what I think to be quite persuasive arguments that there is an objective moral law. We tend to presuppose it in all of our disputes with one another. You know, I got here first. No, I got here first. You should let me sit here first. You promised to give me a bit of your orange, you know, that kind of thing. You should make good on your promises. Notice that in order for the dispute to be a dispute between two people, some things have to not be in dispute, right? We can argue over whether this table over here is a meter long, a meter short, but what we're not arguing over is what a meter is. And so there's this phenomenon of quarrels among human beings where someone is in the right behaviorally, someone is in the wrong, and we seem to presuppose some kind of standard that's binding on us. So then the question becomes, what's the best explanation for this phenomenon of moral intuition? And of course, many explanations have been offered, and Lewis considers some, but I think the best explanation is that the moral law is a witness to the existence of God as a lawgiver. He is a morally superior mind who is above us and has the authority to command us. So the best interpretation of the moral law is that it's the command of a superior being who's trying to get us to behave in a certain way. It's the witness of conscience. And so there are attempts to reduce it to other things. I think those attempts can be successfully resisted. But there you go on the argument for God from morality. I mean, moral law is very curious, right? You can't reduce the moral law to what how we in fact behave, right? It seems to speak to us of how we ought to behave no matter how we in fact do behave, which is why it's probably difficult to explain it by way of science, which is really oriented towards how in fact the world is. The moral law is a witness to something about how the world ought to be, and we feel ourselves keenly under it in a wide variety of circumstances, and I think it cries out for an explanation.
And as you're saying, the best explanation for this would be the existence of God.
Yes.
But what about atheists that would come back and press on you and say, but wait a minute, I don't need your God. to be moral. I'm a perfectly moral person. I don't need God to explain morality. It might be some other thing that explains it. How do we respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a kernel of truth in that objection. And I think those of us who want to do Christian apologetics or just defend the faith more generally, we want to always acknowledge the kernel of truth that's in someone's objection. It helps us understand why it's so persuasive to that person. I think it's quite right that atheists can be moral without God. They can do many outwardly moral things and have stable marriages and all the rest. Quite a few testimony. Right. My own parents are an example of how you don't need to have this kind of faith. But of course, to make that objection would be to misconstrue what we Christians are claiming by way of the moral argument. We're not claiming that one needs to believe in God to be moral. We're actually making a stronger claim, a more metaphysical claim. There actually needs to be a God in order for there to be moral values. Right? So I might claim that you need oxygen in order to breathe. Someone might come back and say, well, wait a minute, I don't need to believe in oxygen in order to breathe. Well, I didn't say that. Lots of people can breathe without believing in oxygen. No one can breathe without there being oxygen. And it's that kind of dependence of morality on God that we're really talking about. So I think it's important to clear up the confusion behind the objection. And that helps you state the argument more clearly.